Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto turns into a fox during a full moon. Pre-timescope, no Biju, Konoha is a village of ninjas who hunt demons. Naruto is a ninja with secrets. And tonight is the night of a full moon. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 34, Red is back. It was nearly dinner time when Mangetsu returned to the house. Yamato conveyed Kushina's desire to discuss the upcoming full moon to him before departing. Mangetsu sighed and secured the house before skulking off to see what Naruto was up to. The boy was asleep on the couch. There was a subtle pinched look to his face, like he was upset. He probably was unhappy that his mother had left him behind. After such a long separation, it would be hard for him to be satisfied with such a short visit. He raised an eyebrow behind his mask at some of the things left on the couch near Naruto. There were a couple of his old kunai lying on the couch arm, stripped of their seal papers and a tad rusty. And draped over the back of the seat was his old flame coat, a gift from the Toad Demons after completing Fyokazaku's training. Kushina must have brought them over. The Umbu removed his mask, hooked it to his belt, and picked up the coat and sniffed it. Kushina's scent clung to the fabric and he thought she'd probably worn it sometimes, maybe even slept in it. His lips twitched towards a faint smile as he ran his gloved hand over the coat. It figures that she would have run off with this, she loved this damn thing. Sighing, he used the coat as a blanket and covered the napping boy up. The lingering scent of his mother on it eased his unconscious mind, and the faint tension in his sleeping face eased into slack peacefulness. Mangetsu indulged in a few caresses of his son's hair before walking back to the kitchen to decide what he should cook for dinner. I don't know what I'm going to do. He had planned on being alone with Naruto on the full moon, revealing his werewolf abilities and perhaps training him a bit if the boy was up to it. He hadn't entirely decided on how he would manage the night and introduce Naruto to his werewolf side. But now Kushina was in the village and wanted in on the night. With her there, Naruto would most likely focus on her and just want to play. And there was the question of how she would react to a full-blooded, fully transformed werewolf. Would she be able to trust him with Naruto? Would she be suspicious of him? Would she get in a fight with him and upset Naruto? Perhaps he could ignore her request to talk and avoid her. There were less than 3 days until the night of the full moon. All he had to do was duck out when she stopped by to visit and then sneak the boy out of the village on the 3rd day before the sun went down. With his high ration it would be so easy. But that would piss her off, he knew. She'd throw a fit and stir up trouble trying to find him. And if, when she finds out about me, it'll only get worse. He stood in front of the pantry, crippled with indecision that had nothing to do with meal choices. He'd made plenty of hard decisions before. Why couldn't he make up his mind now? I've gone Omega, he thought with a flinch. In his self-imposed exile he'd been an outsider wherever he'd gone. He had no backup to call upon, no home to go to, nothing at all. Instead of taking charge of situations and fighting to defend himself, he ran when conflict reared its head. His mentality had shifted from that of an alpha, a dominant wolf, to that of an omega, the wolf at the very bottom of the hierarchy. So, now that he was faced with a cluster of tricky problems, his impulse was to avoid decisions and run instead of selecting a solution. Shit. Inoichi had no real desire to pay the Hokage a visit first thing in the morning, but after listening to his daughter's friend's story he felt that he didn't have any choice. When he had been admitted to the village leader's office he had cringed at the sight of the Hokage. The old man looked like he had aged a good decade since the trials had started, and with whispers of Orochimaru, sabotage, and the Uchiha's misbehavior Inoichi could understand the strain that he-man was under. He felt bad for adding to it. Yes, the old Sarutobi sighed deeply. I am aware of that particular incident. However, I don't have any information to share with you, as Fugaku decided to stab the poor boy before he could be properly debriefed. The Yamanaka tensed. It hadn't been officially released yet as to why Fugaku and a few of his clansmen were in Umbu's secure jail. There had been plenty of wild rumors making the rounds in the village, but to hear that there was any sort of truth to some of them. Why did Fugaku feel the need to stab this boy? Inoichi asked. He had acquired some information that seemed to hint that the boy was a werewolf, and instead of going through the proper channels, namely, openly discussing the issue with me, he decided to take matters into his own hands. The blonde man grimaced in distaste. Whenever Uchiha and werewolf were mentioned in the same breath, there was a headache close behind. Members of the Sharingan-wielding clan were zealots on the subject of werewolves and killing them, and it got on everyone's nerves. Werewolves were dangerous, true, and given a slightly higher rating that they normally would have due to their contagious bite. No one wanted them around, and whenever one was reported, it was dealt with swiftly. But that just wasn't enough for the Uchiha. They wanted to go on crusades into other countries and hunt werewolves down until the curse was dead. Unfortunately, Konoha didn't have the authority to barge into other nations on werewolf hunts. That sort of behavior sparked border disputes with larger nations that had their own ninja forces, and if border disputes weren't worked out, they could swell into genuine wars. And that was very, very bad. Of course, the Uchiha weren't concerned with that. All that mattered to them was expunging the stain of some disowned ancestor bringing the curse from far-off foreign lands from their family. It didn't matter that few people these days were even aware that it was some Uchiha's fault. They insisted on making a huge deal about it and driving everyone crazy in the process. Are they mistaking this kid's possession episode for proof of lycanthropy? Inoichi snorted. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. The Hokage didn't immediately reply. He took a long moment to stuff his pipe with tobacco and light it. After several long puffs and several minutes, he seemed to come to some decision. No, I don't believe Fugaku had enough time to hear about it before he acted, the old man said. He gathered some information on the boy's heritage that he believed indicated lycanthropy. The boy's heritage. Inoichi almost choked. What would that have to do with it? Don't tell me that you never wondered about whether or not Minato's unborn child would somehow inherit the curse, Inoichi, the Hokage replied mildly. Well, yeah, who didn't? The Yamanaka responded. Everyone knew that he had to be a werewolf before he impregnated her, he had to have been one for years, and after so long it had to seep into his seed. Inoichi frowned. What does that have to do with some foster kid? Every child has to come from somewhere, the old man smiled faintly. They don't just spring up from thin air. Inoichi frowned. He was getting the distinct impression that the Hokage was toying with him, having a bit of fun at his expense. If Shikaka was present, he would probably have figured out what was going on by now, but Inoichi wasn't a freaking genius like his old Nara buddy was. So Fugaku found out who the boy's parents are, and one or both of them turned out to be werewolves, so he thought that the kid was a werewolf too. He guessed. Basically, yes, the Hokage nodded. Huh. The Yamanaka sat back in the chair set before the Hokage's large desk. Well, the boy isn't a werewolf, right? Naruto does possess some lycanthropic traits, but also several traits that are clearly not lycanthropic, the old Sarutobi replied, puffing on his pipe. I've had him carefully watched ever since this came to my attention. While I haven't yet received a full report on his performance in the trials so far due to Fugaku's interference, I have yet to see solid proof that he is dangerous or disloyal to the village. When he recovers from Fugaku's assault, I may call on you to examine his mind if he truly doesn't remember this possession episode that his teammate reported. Okay. Trusting in the Hokage's judgment was usually the way to go. The ninja leader's only major blunder had been with Orochimaru, and considering how long the snake had fooled most of the village, and the student-teacher relationship between the two men, the mistake was understandable. And Inoichi had a good chance of examining this boy personally, so that he could make up his own mind, if he was patient. Is there any estimate if when the boy would be ready for a mind scan? Probably not for the next 5 days at least, the Hokage replied. And as his mother has recently arrived, it will be necessary to get her permission. His mother? The Yamanaka man frowned. Isn't he some fostered orphan? Not all children put into foster care are orphans, the old man pointed out. His mother was forced to relinquish custody due to family pressures. She arrived in Konoha 2 days ago and she is not pleased with recent events. I can imagine, Inoichi muttered. If Fugaku ever went after Ino for any reason, I'd get inside his head and make him wish that he'd never been born. I'm sure that you'll run into her soon enough, the Hokage smiled. You were acquainted with Uzumaki Kushina in the past, weren't you? Yeah, I remember her. Who could forget her? It's a shame that she felt she had to leave. Yes, it was, the old Hokage agreed and gave him a wave of dismissal. Don't be surprised if you see her on the street. Having nothing else to discuss with the village leader, Inoichi bowed and left the office. As he worked his way down several different flights of stairs to street level, he mulled over the Hokage's parting remark and the odd comments buried in their conversation. When he reached the tower's exit, a startling possibility hit him like a door to the face. Kushin is back, and that boy, her son. Minato's spawn. Holy. Barely dodging an actual door to the face as some Chunin rushed inside, Inoichi slipped out into the sunshine and shoved his hands into his coat pockets. If Fugaku manages to walk away from this alive, it will be with pink hair. Kashoka was rather disappointed that the Uchiha hadn't exploded quite as spectacularly as he'd hoped that they would. Fugaku's heir, Itachi, had managed to leash his clan rather effectively so far. Not even the boon of having little Sasuke branded with a curse mark and cast out for his taint had helped the Byakucha further his plans. The Uchiha district is like a pressure cooker, he thought to himself as he slipped out of the small cafe where he'd had his lunch. The longer young Itachi tries to sit on them with his father locked up in jail, the more pressure that will build. The trick will be applying the right sort of trigger at the right moment to get the real bang that I need. The Ozunin forced back a scowl as he glimpsed a flicker of what might have been an Umbu tailing him up on the rooftops. It seemed that ever since the day that Fugaku had attempted to assassinate the Uzumaki abomination he always had a shadow that he needed to lose. He supposed that it was possible that he'd been tailed even earlier in his stay in this village, but the fact that nothing had been done about him indicated that they hadn't seen him doing anything, or that the Hokage was senile and stupid. If the Hokage even suspects what I'm up to, he's an absolute fool leaving me in place, the hidden fox smirked to himself as he set about shaking his stalker by heading for the busiest crowds he could find. A farmer isn't much of a farmer if he knows a fox is raiding his henhouse at will and does nothing to stop it. No kitsune would be foolish enough to let a foe wreak havoc in his own territory. Really, how is this village still standin'? Hello there, a woman's voice greeted. You must be that Byakucha that I heard was here. Kashoka snapped his head around so fast that he almost gave himself whiplash. The owner of the voice was a woman with dark blue-gray eyes and very long, very straight, very red hair. Her plain dark clothing was unremarkable, but the swirl of Uzushio on her hitayate immediately caught his attention. I was not informed that anyone else was coming, he said slowly. How funny, she chuckled. My clan had no idea that anyone from Uzu was here at all until it drifted to our ears second-hand. Why is that? What clan are you from? Kashoku asked warily. Her clothes lacked any obvious clan symbol and red hair wasn't terribly uncommon in Uzushio. The fact that she didn't know that he had come both puzzled and worried him. She clearly wasn't Byakuchi as he didn't recognize her at all and she wasn't a Kurohi. Uzumaki. She sing-songed, flashing him a toothy smile. And guess what, I'm stealing your job. Your what? Kashoku asked sharply, his mind racing. The Uzumaki was a powerless clan now. They didn't have the pull to send anyone to Konoha and they were too honorable to go behind the other clans' backs. So had the Uzumaki broken into factions with one of them allied with the Kurohi? And what did she mean that she was stealing his job? Was this hypothetical faction of Uzumaki trying to prove itself to the Kurohi by outdoing him and destabilizing Konoha? Or had the Uzumaki actually sent an ambassador without village approval and she thought she was stealing the diplomatic job that was just his cover from him? I'm stealing your job because it was my job first, she told him smugly. And since I have all the solid connections that you don't, I'll win. Konoha only needs one Uzu ambassador so you should just leave now and save yourself the embarrassment. So, she's actually taking the duty seriously. He narrowed his pale blue eyes at the strange woman. And she claims to have had this job before. There was only one female in her age range from Clan Uzumaki who had been selected to be the liaison to the Leaf, that disgusting werewolf lover. Ah, the infamous Uzumaki Kushina, how unpleasant to make your acquaintance, he sneered and folded his arms over his chest. They let you off your chain. Her smiling expression faltered, but only for a second. So you're sticking around, then? She raised an eyebrow. What a shame. I've known Hokage-sama and most of the current major clan heads for years and years. They'll trust me over you any day. You'll never have anything important to do here. Kashoku snorted and started walking again. The woman was an airhead, a joke. She would be nothing more than an added annoyance. It almost wouldn't be worth the effort of adding her presence into his next coded status report. A pair of hands grabbed his shoulders and the disgraced Kushina whispered into his ear from behind. Before you go on your merry way, a warning. If I find out that you encouraged Fugaku to stab my baby, I'll out you. What are you, T? I'm sure that Fugaku would love to have a brand new kitsune skin to hang from his wall, she purred darkly. The blood in his veins froze. You wouldn't. He hissed. I would, she chirped and patted his shoulder before almost skipping away. Have a nice day. She's insane. Kashoku thought as he watched her leave over his shoulder. She's absolutely insane. What the hell does Udai see in her? Sasuke stood stock still, senses on full alert, waiting. Without so much as a sound, a flurry of kunai exploded from one of the trees that surrounded him. Snapping on his Sharingan, he did his best to avoid the blades while moving as little as possible. When the barrage ended, Sasuke had a shallow slice on one arm and his left cheek in addition to the handful that he already possessed. Kakashi dropped from the tree, eyed him for a moment, and nodded. Take a 10-minute break. The boy relaxed and dragged himself back to the entrance of the training ground where he'd left his extra supplies and his water. After taking a few good sips of water, he used some of it to clean his cuts. He started to stretch out when a shadow fell over him. He glanced up, expecting to see his teacher. Instead, it was Itachi with a large duffel bag. Good morning, little brother, Itachi nodded. Training is going well, I hope. You shouldn't be talking to me, Sasuke mumbled, dropping his gaze to the grass. I don't care what the rest of the clan thinks, Itachi said. You're my brother and I have every right to talk to you. He dropped the bag near Sasuke's water and training supplies. I've brought you some things from mother. Sasuke hesitated before unzipping the bag to see what it contained. He found clothes, all the clothes that he'd left behind when the clan elders had commanded him to leave. They were all washed and neatly folded. And every red and white Yukawa fan that had once been sewn onto them had been removed. So, I guess I'll have to fix the rest of my clothes myself, he muttered, tugging at the still Uchiwa-adorned shirt that he was wearing. Mother would help if you asked her, his older brother replied. She'd break the taboo and talk to me, too. Sasuke asked, trying not to get his hopes up. If you catch her outside of the Uchiha district, of course she'll talk to you, Itachi said. It would make her very happy to spend time with you. Sasuke swallowed hard and scrubbed his face with a towel. With every passing day, every hour, he realized more and more how much he'd taken things for granted. Every morning his mother had been there with breakfast, washed and folded his clothes, and tended to all the little injuries he'd accumulate from training. Every day he'd see his brother and usually his father. He'd always had his own room and always lived in a real house in a neighborhood where almost everyone knew who he was. Now he camped out on Kakashi's couch in the Jounin's cramped apartment. He had to take care of everything himself. And he would be lucky if he saw any member of his family, not that they would ever acknowledge him now. Foolish little brother. Sasuke looked up in time to feel his older brother's 2 fingers poking him in the forehead. Don't be so sad. Why not? Sasuke demanded sullenly. What is there to be happy about? You're still alive and still have a good shot at being promoted to Chunin, Itachi calmly pointed out. I actually envy you a little bit, Sasuke. What's there to envy? There are days that I wish I could move out of the Uchiha district and live on my own, out from under the eyes of the entire clan, his older brother said. Without the Uchiha name, I would be free of a lot of expectations and people would see me for myself and not as another Uchiha. Sasuke stared at his brother, trying to see what he was getting at. You have the chance to really make a name for yourself, Itachi continued. You can prove that not all wielders of the Sharingan are alike. What do you mean? The boy wondered with a frown. Those outside the clan do not have a very favorable opinion of the Uchiha, his brother explained. They respect our power, yes, but little else. We are seen as arrogant, inbred snobs without any sense of humor or the ability to smile. If the village didn't need the abilities of the Sharingan, they probably wouldn't have agreed to allow our clan to be part of its initial formation centuries ago. People really think that? Sasuke sputtered, outraged. They do, Kakashi agreed, leaning up against a tree several yards away. And foreigners have even worse opinions. Foreign ninjas have a hard time believing that Konoha puts up with the Uchiha. Why? The boy asked, looking back and forth between his teacher and his brother. They live apart in their own exclusive neighborhood and rarely invite anyone in, Kakashi said. And if they ever compliment a non-Uchiha, it's so backhanded most people take them to be thinly veiled insults. Those two facts alone allow the Hyuga clan to rank above the Uchiha in the minds of most of the ninja population. Exactly, Itachi nodded. The Uchiha don't respect non-Uchiha, and so the rest of the village's ninja resent the clan. Sasuke plucked at some blades of grass in agitation before glancing over at his Jonin-sensei. Is the break over, yet? Kakashi pulled a watch out of his pocket and consulted for a moment before nodding. Sure. Okay, Sasuke muttered and stood up, bowing briefly to his brother. Thank you for bringing me my clothes, Itachi. The Uchiha nodded in return and walked away. Sasuke watched him go before turning back to his teacher and his training so that he didn't have to think about his old clan, how he missed it, and how less and less perfect it seemed the longer that he was away. Naruto fidgeted restlessly at the kitchen table as he waited for his mother to hopefully appear. He'd already bolted down his lunch of stuffed rice balls and had probably driven Mangetsu mad asking if the Umbu knew if his mother was coming yet every 5 minutes. The boy traced random patterns on the tabletop and glanced furtively at the back door where Mangetsu was loitering. Do you know if she's coming yet? No, Naruto, I don't. The Umbu stopped and tilted his masked head, as if listening to something. Oh, here she comes. Mangetsu pressed his hand against the door, apparently to disengage some security measure. Naruto blinked and he was gone. No hand seals, no burst of smoke, he just vanished in an instant with barely a sound. He was still staring at the empty spot in shock when his mother opened the door and strode inside. Hey! What are you staring at? Nothing, Naruto answered truthfully and hopped off his chair to limp over to her as quickly as he could to hug her. Hi Mom. How are you? She smiled, hugging him back. Feeling better? Yeah, lots, Naruto grinned. I might not even need as many bandages by tomorrow. Very good, and have you eaten lunch yet? When he nodded, she whipped out a bag of chocolate candies. Good, I was hoping to split these. Herding him towards the living room couch, she glanced around. Where's this Mangetsu guy who's supposed to be here? He left, Naruto said and flopped onto the couch. Did he say where he was going? His mother asked as she sat beside him and tore open the candy bag. Nope, the boy shrugged and snagged a handful of candy-coated chocolates from the bag. He just unlocked the door for you and left. That's twice now that he vanishes when I show up, she frowned and tossed a few candies in her mouth, crunching on them hard. It's almost like he's avoiding me. I don't like that. I'll let him know, Naruto offered cheerfully. You do that, she muttered, almost pouting. Well, I've got a couple of hours, so let's look at some pictures and then you can tell me stories about your team. How does that sound? Naruto flashed her a thumbs up while shoving more chocolate into his mouth. Don't put so much in your mouth at one time, she warned him and took an envelope out of one of her pockets. Now it's story time. She pulled the photos out of the envelope and haphazardly spread them out on top of an emptied cardboard box. Some pictures were older than others and they had a bunch of different people in them. But all the photos had one thing in common, the same guy was in all of them somewhere. Naruto picked up what seemed to be the oldest of the pictures. The guy looked to be about Naruto's age and there was an eerie resemblance between them. The mystery blonde genin had been captured flashing the photographer a really cheesy smile that made him look incredibly dorky. Wait a minute, isn't this? He thought back to months earlier, before the trials, when the Hokage had confronted him about being a werewolf and the old man had shown him two pictures. One had been his mother. And the other had been his father. All of the pictures his mother had brought for him were of his father. He scowled. Ow hey. Naruto whined as his mother tweaked his ear. Don't make faces like that, she scolded and then gestured to the picture in his hand. Now, this was taken of your father about the same time that I first met him. This sucks, Naruto huffed, glowering at the stupid picture of his very young sire. First his stuff, and now pictures and stories of him. And since it's mom, I can't tell her that I don't wanna hear about it. Back then I didn't know about his furry little problem, she continued, oblivious to his whiny thoughts. All I thought about him was that he was a flake with a dumb smile, and due to a little misunderstanding when we were first introduced I ended up punching him in the face. Okay, maybe this won't be so bad. Chapter 35, Chess and Tea. Mangetsu perched in a sheltered spot on the roof while he waited for Kushina to leave. He didn't want to cut into Naruto's time with his mother, or meet with her while in the neighborhood. However, she decided to react to him. There would be yelling, and yelling would destroy the impression that this house was still abandoned and uninhabited, at the very least. He would meet with her someplace quiet and out of the way, like a training ground. And to do that, Naruto would either have to be asleep or under another Umbu's watch while he was away. Mangetsu tried to think of some Umbu that he knew well enough to trust that would be free for babysitting duty, but he was only familiar with a handful. From what I remember, Crane has tail duty on that Koshoku character. Spider is leading a team to acquire some demons for the final phase of the trials. Yamato has a few shifts of keeping an eye on the Uchiha. Perhaps I can bribe Sparrow to stay longer when she stops by tomorrow. The back door creaked open and Mangetsu took care to make sure that his light camouflage jutsu was still active. He stayed still as she left and didn't move until she was well out of sight. Then he ended his jutsu, slid off the roof, and walked back into the house, sealing the door behind him. Mom wasn't happy that you weren't here, Naruto said in greeting to him as he ambled into the living room. She thinks that you're avoiding her. I just don't want to take up her precious time with you, Mangetsu replied. I'll be looking for her later. Okay, Naruto shrugged. The Umbu watched the boy for a minute. He was trying to act upbeat, but he was still unhappy that his mother had left him behind again. Mangetsu felt bad, but until Naruto was sufficiently recovered it wasn't safe to let the boy leave the house. So, did you have a good time? The Umbu asked, taking a seat on the couch with him. Yeah, Naruto nodded. We swapped stories. What sort of stories? Naruto immediately launched into a summary of most of the embarrassing moments of Namikaze Minato's life from his first meeting with Kushina, where she'd given him a black eye, up to dragging Shikaku, Inoichi, and Chauza home from a bachelor party and getting vomited on twice in the process. Mangetsu was grateful for his mask because there was no way that he could have kept his dismay from his face. Naruto was downright gleeful by the time he was done and started listing his own adventures that he'd told his mother about. Kushina hates me, he sulked as Naruto chattered away. Every moment of humiliation that wasn't sex-related and nothing at all flattering about me. Naruto has to believe that I'm some sort of klutzy clown. At least he enjoyed story time. After Naruto was done sharing all the tales he'd told his mother, Mangetsu had a few thoughts. This Chunin, Mizuki, had probably already been dealt with, but he wished for a good 10 minutes alone with the little creep to teach him a lesson. The other Chunin, Iruka, deserved his thanks for looking after Naruto much better than Mizuki had. He needed to determine what book it was that Kakashi was so attached to, and if it was the book that he was afraid it was, he needed to burn it. And he needed to find out more about the Kyuubi. A lot more. Perhaps I'll even arrange to talk to Kushina tonight. Hey, Mangetsu, do you think I'm in trouble for how I beat Kiba? No, the Umbu shook his head. What you did was well within the rules. You didn't set out to kill or permanently harm Kiba, and you didn't go overboard or harm him when he was defeated. I'm sure that Hokage-sama would have preferred if you won through some other means, but you're not in trouble. I'll be sure to report your side of things to Hokage-sama as soon as possible. Okay, Naruto mumbled, picking at one of the couch cushions. Do you think that the Kyuubi's ghost was right? That there's a way to get rid of my human blood and the werewolf curse with it? It might be possible, Mangetsu hesitantly answered. Cool. Naruto grinned, hopping up onto the couch. Do you know anyone who could? Hold on a minute, he sighed, catching Naruto's sleeve and pulling him back down. I wasn't finished. Mangetsu paused a beat to be sure that the boy was listening before continuing. To seal away or otherwise remove half of a Hanyu's nature has very dire consequences. Like what? The boy demanded with a pout. When I was younger I read some ancient sealing texts that detailed attempts to make Hanyu either fully human or fully demon. Those that tried to be fully human were left sickly and weak, and those that strived to become fully demon became dangerously aggressive and destructive. Whatever the Hanyu tried to become, they always were left mentally unstable if not fully insane. If you were to cancel out your human blood, you'd probably be left as a fox-like beast with limited rational thought. You would not know your friends from your enemies, you would attack them indiscriminately. It's likely that you would even turn on your own mother. Naruto's face turned ashen. I don't mean to frighten you, Mangetsu apologized, but it's important that you know the risks. Even if those old texts aren't entirely correct, would you want to risk it? No, the boy mumbled. So, there's no way to make me not be a werewolf. There isn't, not for one who is born a werewolf. The wolf-masked ninja gently patted the boy's shoulder. I'm sorry. And he was sorry. Sorry that Naruto inherited the affliction from him. Sorry that there was no way to undo it. Sorry that his son had suffered so much because of it. Sorry for everything. Demon hunters, they don't know everything. Naruto looked up at him, wild-eyed and desperate. How do you know there's no way to cure me? It's true that ninjas who hunt demons rarely know everything about the creatures they hunt, but I'm sure of this, Mangetsu said. I've tried to understand lycanthropy and find a cure for it for most of my life. All I've heard about cures are whispered rumors of remedies that would only work on the freshly bitten. There is nothing you can do, Naruto, but learn to live with it. The poor boy looked devastated. Mangetsu felt bad for allowing the conversation drift into such grim territory. And he felt awful for crushing Naruto's hopes, but lying to him about his chances for normalcy would have been even worse. Are you sure you don't want to play a game of checkers? The Umbu asked, eyeing the set-up game board that waited on its makeshift box table, untouched. Naruto mutely shook his head. How about chess? I don't know how to play, Naruto muttered listlessly. I can teach you if you want, Mangetsu offered. When Naruto didn't say no, he took it as a yes and got up from the couch. He went over to his stack of boxes, resolving to either move them someplace else or unpack them, yet again, and dug out another game board and set of pieces. Laying the board on top of a different box, he started setting up the different black and white pieces in their proper places. Since you aren't cleared for any physical training, we'll try and train your mind a little bit instead, Mangetsu said cheerily and pushed the box up to the couch. Any preference on color? I don't care, Naruto pouted. You're the white side, then, Mangetsu shrugged and turned the board so that the white pieces were within Naruto's reach. Now there are several types of pieces, and each type has its own rules. That sounds hard, Naruto complained, seemingly determined to stay in a glum mood. Shogi is harder, the Umbu told him. And once you can remember what each piece can do, it's not all that difficult. The challenge becomes outwitting your opponent instead of recalling how to move the pieces on the board, and depending on your opponent it can be quite the struggle. Is this really supposed to be training? The boy wondered, poking at a white pawn with his fingertip. Of course it is, Mangetsu smiled behind his mask. My old sensei taught this game to me when I was a little genin hoping to become a chunin. Naruto gave him a dubious look. Think of the different pieces as different kinds of ninja, the Umbu suggested and pointed to one of his black pawns. The little pawn is like a genin. Which one's the Hokage? The boy interrupted. The queen, Mangetsu answered. The queen. Naruto repeated with a confused scowl. Isn't a queen a girl? There has been a woman Hokage before, the Umbu chuckled. But the supposed gender of the piece isn't what makes it like the Hokage, it's the power of the piece. It can move in any direction, and move as many squares as you desire in the direction that you pick, during a turn. No other piece has such flexibility and wide range of movement. Oh. Naruto scratched at the back of his head. Is there a king? Yes, there is a piece called a king, the masked man nodded. It's very similar to the queen in that it is allowed to move in any direction, but it can only move one square per turn. That stinks, the boy frowned. What sort of lame ninja is the king? I don't think of the king as a ninja at all, but as the fire daimyo, Mangetsu replied. The king is a weak piece, but it is also the most important piece in the game. In checkers you win when you've taken all of the other players' pieces, but in chess when you capture your opponent's king, you win. The daimyo is a civilian, but if he is taken out, the country could fall apart, so he fits perfectly as the king. Do you understand? Naruto seemed to chew it over in his head for a minute before slowly nodding. Since the daimyo is lame but important, he gets to be a lame but important piece in the game. More or less, Mangetsu sighed. Now, are there any other pieces you really want to know about, or can I list them in my own order? The boy hesitated before picking up one of his white horse head pieces. This one, the horse knight thing, what sort of ninja would it be? Knights move in interesting ways that can be used to slip through the other player's defenses. The Umbu tapped his knee thoughtfully for a second before completing his answer. I'd have to say that the knights count as some kind of Jounin level ninja. Naruto fidgeted with the piece before slowly putting it back in its spot. Okay. Alright, then, Mangetsu nodded. Let's go over the last few pieces and then we can start playing. Kushina perched on one of the little bridges set up in one of the quieter parts of the village and stared down into the water. She wanted to go back to that broken down little house and take Naruto away with her so that she could walk through the village with him and take him out to eat at restaurants. But he wasn't healed yet and it just wasn't safe. Hearing about Naruto's life in Konoha from Naruto instead of from Jiraiya had been hard. There hadn't been much mention of this Mizuki creep before, and hearing about how the Chunin had totally ignored Naruto and then turned around and tried to use him to commit a crime had made her blood boil. The other Chunin, Iruka, had sounded much better, even though Naruto had complained about how hard it had been to sneak away for the full moon with him around. But the fresher information, like his adventures in the trials, had been even worse to hear. She was very pleased to hear that he had advanced so far on his first try, and beaten a bigger Inuzuka boy. However, the way he'd won had worried her some. And the Kyubi had touched him. When she'd undertaken the trials in Konoha years ago, she'd been warned to not approach the monstrous fox's bones or touch them, but she'd thought that it was because of some old superstition. Now she knew that the evil spirit was real. It had touched her baby, and there was nothing she could do about it. If only I had been here to warn him. There were a lot of things that she would change if she could. She wouldn't compromise with her father, she would run away with Naruto and find Jiraiya to protect them. She would tell him all the stories about Minato before he got it fixed in his head that his father was a worthless beast to be despised. She would teach him all of her skills so that he could defend himself if necessary and be on his way to being a great ninja like his father. And she would make sure that Fugaku never dared touch a hair on his head. Shaking her head roughly, she pulled her mind out of fantasy land and shoved it back into reality. She was here to do a job. She had to kick Koshoku out, prove to the Hokage that the Uzumaki were on the side of good, and take care of Naruto, and make an effort to do it all in that order. Flipping her long red hair over her shoulder, she hopped off the bridge rail and started walking through the darkening village streets, hoping that movement would get her plotting juices flowing. I've given Koshoku a warning, but he's the sort of jerk who won't take me seriously. First thing tomorrow I need to meet up with old friends and convince them that he's a slimy bastard who isn't to be trusted. When they bitch to the Hokage, he'll have more clout to kick Koshoku out and demand that Uzushio sends someone else, or no one else, because I'm here. As she wandered aimlessly, she thought of how to convince the various clan leaders that she knew of her point of view. Chaozu wouldn't be too hard to convince. Inoichi would likely be another easy sell. Shikaku might want to debate it some until she made it too troublesome for him. If she could put together a few canine-framed arguments, she'd have the Inuzuka with her. Convincing the Aburame would be tricky as they really liked logic and Kushina didn't think in logical sorts of terms. The Hyuga would be another hard one. And the Uchiha. Blia, the Uchiha. Is Mikoto in charge now that Fugaku's rotting in prison? Or would it be Itachi? Kushina strolled past a playground and came to a stop by a light pole. The last few children at play were being coaxed away by their parents to go home for dinner. One dark-haired woman lingered, watching the children and their parents leave with a rather mournful expression on her face. The redhead hesitated for a moment before crossing the street and sidling up to the other woman. Hey Mikoto, what's up? Oh. The Uchiha woman flinched guiltily. Oh, I was just taking a walk and thinking. And being miserable and missing one of your kids and angsting over Fugaku, Kushina silently added. I didn't know what he was going to do, Mikoto said suddenly. And I didn't know that Naruto was your son. I'd like to think that I would have invited him over for lunch sometime if I'd known, and asked Sasuke to look out for him. She stared at the vacant swing set for a minute before looking back at Kushina with a question. Why was he here by himself? Lots of stupid drama with my family that I'd rather not rehash, the Uzumaki grimaced. Do you have any plans for dinner? Well, no. Good. Kushina linked her arm with Mikoto's and started towing her off. Let's go get some food. Her life had always been orderly. She had worked to be the best ninja that she could be, and when a husband had been chosen for her she strived to be the best wife, and later mother, that she could be. Uchiha Mikoto's world had always been secure and certain. But the week so far had unsettled every aspect of her life. It was like some vindictive god had picked up her world, turned it upside down, and shaken it. Every time that she was sure that there was nothing else that could fly out of her control, something else would happen that made everything worse. Sasuke had come home from the Forest of Death with a curse mark from Orochimaru's foul bite on his neck. Fugaku had disgraced the clan name by attacking a child werewolf under the Hokage's protection and gotten 2 men killed, and himself and another imprisoned. Sasuke was found out and cast out by the clan while Itachi spent more and more time trying to keep everything under control, and she felt powerless to help. Kushina, her old friend, returned and revealed that the child werewolf was her child. And now her old friend was taking her out to dinner, functioning like nothing was wrong when Mikoto couldn't seem to do the same because she knew that everything was wrong. They were at an outside table at a casual restaurant that was cheap enough for Kushina's wallet and classy enough for Mikoto's taste. It was getting to be autumn and the sky was stained with the fiery colors of sunset, but the air was still more than warm enough to be comfortable outdoors without a coat. They'd ordered some tea and crackers to have while they waited for their meals to be prepared and brought out. So I find this guy and chat with him and he's a total jerk, Kushina rambled. Did you meet this Byakuchi Kashoka guy? Yes, I did, Mikoto nodded, recalling the brown-haired man who had visited her home while Sasuke was still in the thick of the trials. What did you think of him? He was polite, but not very helpful, the Uchiha woman said after a moment's thought. I asked him about you and he said he didn't know anything. What a fibber. Kushina snorted. I'm quite infamous now in Uzushio, so he definitely had plenty of nasty gossip that he didn't share with you. Fugaku had lunch with him that day, Mikoto continued, staring down into her cup of barely touched tea. I didn't really pay attention to what they talked about, but Fugaku showed him Sasuke's team photo that really surprised me. Normally he only ever talked about Sasuke with me in private, so I was confused about why he'd be bragging about him to a foreigner. Kushina was silent and for a minute her friendly expression darkened into something angry. Normally when she was angry the redhead would get loud. An angry and quiet Kushina was both rare and very unnerving. So Kashoka saves all his nasty gossip for Fugaku and keeps you out of the loop, the red-haired woman grumbled. How nice. It seems that way now, Mikoto weakly agreed, feeling foolish for trusting her husband. Fugaku was a hard man, but a good man. He had high standards that he applied to himself as well as everyone else. He'd never beaten her or belittled her, he always complimented her cooking, he'd given her 2 beautiful sons, he kept the clan and the military police running smoothly, and everything had seemed so perfect. She'd never dreamed that she would have to worry about him angering the Hokage by harming her friend's only child. What a jerk, Kushina pouted and crunched into a cracker. I'm so going to kick this Kashoka guy's ass, Dateibane. Mikoto managed a little smile. Some things just never changed. And for a minute it brought her mind back to happier times. So, did you get to see Naruto? Mikoto asked. Yes, Kushina smiled. Twice so far, and already I can see that he's doing better. That's excellent. The Uchiha replied as the crushing weight of guilt lightened. I'm very glad to hear that. I just wish he'd heal faster, the redhead sighed, polishing off her tea. I want to take him with me instead of leaving him there. Naruto is a master of the kicked puppy look. I can't decide if it's his big blue eyes or the whiskers on his cheeks that makes it so effective. Do you think that when Naruto is better that I could meet him? Mikoto inquired nervously. I won't be offended if you say no. After what my husband did You're not Fugaku, Kushina snorted. You're my friend. And I can't imagine you doing something bad enough to stop being my friend. So when Naruto is back to 100% we'll see about having a nice lunch with him or something. Thank you, Mikoto nearly whispered and spent several minutes focusing on her neglected tea until she was sure that she wouldn't start crying. When is the food going to get here? The red-haired woman groused. I'm getting hungry. I'm sure that it'll be here soon, her black-haired friend sighed patiently. Kushina, after you left, I always wanted to ask you something. Shoot, the Uzumaki invited, propping her chin on the heel of her hand. Did you know about Minato? Mikoto asked slowly, biting her lip, before he. Yes, Kushina replied stiffly. And you stayed. Why should I have left? She frowned. I looked at his lycanthropy like a terminal illness. You don't leave someone that you love just because you find out that he has cancer. To me it was the same sort of thing. You weren't afraid? Mikoto wondered. Not even a little bit. I trusted him, Kushina shrugged and leaned back in her chair. Life is full of all sorts of risks and I didn't want to regret losing a moment with him. Mikoto thought of her own cursed son and found that she couldn't really argue, so she nodded and changed the subject to something less charged. So what sort of things did Naruto do as a baby? Sasuke would always. Kurohi Yuta was grateful to have such a competent son and grandson. His son Yuma had the patience necessary to keep the clan functioning well, which considering the mixed bag nature of the clan was no easy task. And his grandson Udai was brilliant, very powerful for his age, and increasingly integral to their plans. Udai's idea to ally with Orochimaru was risky, but it's really paying off. Their pack of werewolves was growing by the week and after the next full moon barely 2 days away they would have the bare minimum that they'd need. The collars used to control them were also fairly easily adapted to other species, allowing them to forcibly recruit members of other demon races that would be useful towards their cause. And the extra scrolls that had just come in as thanks for the pups that they'd sacrificed were very, very promising. Currently he was reviewing on that dealt with the serpent's experiments in the field of necromancy. Creating run-of-the-mill zombies was a wasted effort, but if he could uncover some technique or process that resulted in something better, more dangerous. And then a flash of inspiration sparked in the old fox's brain. If we could resurrect that, we'd barely need Orochimaru and his Otonin. It's located so close to the leaf that we could destroy both Konoha and Oto in one blow. And after that, no demon hunter force would be able to stand against us. The old man flexed his claws and returned to his studies of the scroll with a feral smirk. Those old bones will be our greatest weapon. Chapter 36, Run. Orochimaru sat in the corner of his lab that he considered his office. He ran through rosters and lists, carefully managing his limited personnel. He needed to have as many available for quick mobilization to Konoha as possible while still having ninja run missions and bring in precious income. It was a task made more difficult by a lack of a definite date for the attack. Orochimaru preferred to attack during the final phase of the trials when Konoha's forces would be stretched thin by so many foreign guests, warriors, and be distracted by the fights going on in the stadium. Uzushio wanted to attack sometime after that, when Konoha would be on a lower alert level with all of their guests gone. Their choice of time is valid, the Snake Man thought. But I've waited long enough. Sarutobi-sensei is getting old. I want to smite him before he dies of old age. Pure-blooded humans have such short lifespans. A knock at his doorway drew his golden serpent eyes away from his papers. One of his young elites, Tayuya, bowed to him and awaited his acknowledgement. She was a difficult and rude girl, but she knew to respect him. Yes, Tayuya. Orochimaru-sama, the girl murmured as she approached him and bowed again. Those little furballs are driving everyone crazy. They won't stop crying for their dem mamas. Don't whine, Orochimaru warned. It's beneath you. Yes, sir. Now use that wonderful flute of yours and play them a lullaby, he instructed. Show them that their mothers are dead and that their fathers don't want them. Teach them that we are their family now and that they should forget everything else. A wicked smile tugged at the teenager's lips and she bowed again. I'll get right on it, Orochimaru-sama. Just remember to build them back up after you break them down, the man said. And involve your teammates. Don't hog all the fun for yourself. Yes, sir. He made a gesture of dismissal and the foul-mouthed girl left in a much better mood than she had arrived. It's a pity that Kimimaro is off acting as a sensei for my little Oto Genin, Orochimaru thought as he turned back to his paperwork. The things that he can do with his bones would surely terrify and impress those little fox whelps. It almost makes me regret that Doso managed to make it to the final phase. But then again, he mused, pulling a tiny pill bottle out of his pocket and rattling its contents. Kimimaro is in the perfect position to stir things up a bit more. Since that Uchiha boy survived receiving the mark, he can surely tolerate my new enhancements. Mangetsu swallowed a sigh as he watched Naruto demolish his breakfast. The genin had had a lot of trouble keeping all the chess pieces straight, so Mangetsu had walked him through the game again and again the previous evening. By the time that Naruto had finally given up for the night, it had been much too late to look for Kushina. So he'd gone to bed with the plan of looking for her in the morning after finding Naruto a babysitter. While he'd been cooking breakfast, he had used his radio to ask around. As he'd feared the day before, none of the Umbu that he would have preferred were available. The few Umbu members that he could call on he didn't know well and most were too junior for his taste. Hey, aren't you going to eat anything? Naruto asked. I already ate, Mangetsu answered. Okay, the boy shrugged and went back to the task of cleaning his plate. The man in the wolf mask leaned against the kitchen counter and watched Naruto eat. The boy was recovering well, but with the full moon only one day away it probably wouldn't be enough. The change would hurt him and leave him more drained than normal. But in the long run it wouldn't hamper Naruto's healing by more than an extra day at most. The transformation itself would close what was left of his wounds, so it would just be a matter of building up his energy. More chess today? Naruto wondered glumly as he finished devouring his food. Later, if you want, Mangetsu answered, taking the dirty dishes from him and putting them in the sink. I have a few things to do today, so you'll have the morning to yourself. You're leaving. Naruto blinked in shock. Only for a few hours, he replied. There are batteries in the remote so the TV will work now, so you'll have something to do. And the seals that I've put into this house will keep it secure. No one else is coming. The boy gulped. With the trials going on, Umbu is stretched pretty thin, Mangetsu explained. But as I said, my seals will keep you safe and I'll only be away for a few hours. If I don't make it back by lunch, someone else will come by. Okay, Naruto nodded slowly. Relax, the man smiled behind his mask and ruffled the boy's hair. There's food in the pantry and the fridge, and television to entertain you. So long as you stay inside like you're supposed to, nothing's going to happen. Okay, Naruto repeated, trying to fix his hair even though no matter what he did it looked the same. I'll be back soon, Mangetsu promised and then warped away instantaneously, moving from the kitchen to a rooftop just inside Konoha's large shopping and business district. The Umbu took a moment to survey his new surroundings before roof-hopping off in search of his target. Okay Kushina, where are you? Itachi marched into the Umbu prison once again to meet with his father a second time. When he reached Fugaku's cell everything looked the same, the man was sitting in the exact same spot with the same posture. It was like no time had passed between Itachi's visits when in reality it had been several days. Father, he greeted through the bars. Any news on my release? Fugaku grunted. Hokage-sama informs me that you will be formally judged in 3 days, Itachi answered. It wouldn't really be a trial or a court-martial. The Hokage would call all of the major and some of the minor clan leaders together. Fugaku would probably get a chance to speak his piece. There would be some discussion. And then the Hokage would officially decide what to do with him and the clan. Humph, the man snorted. Any other news? Orochimaru branded Sasuke with a curse mark, Itachi informed him. The clan found out about it and drove him out. Uchiha Fugaku finally had a clear reaction. He bowed his head for several minutes and Itachi almost thought that he was shedding a few tears. And then he straightened up as if nothing was wrong. The only thing betrayed him was that his voice was a bit thick-sounding. Sarutobi was a true fool for letting that snake run away, the man growled. Slaying that creature must be our top priority. This tragedy must be avenged. Yes, father, Itachi nodded. Orochimaru was dangerous not only to the Uchiha but to all of Konoha. The former Konohanin needed to be dealt with permanently so that no one else would suffer as his brother was suffering. Itachi would have set his sights on destroying Orochimaru even if his father hadn't ordered it. Also, mother is very angry with you, Itachi continued. And she says that Uzumaki Kushina is in Konoha and furious with you. That woman. Fugaku sneered. She is nothing more than an annoyance. Pay her no mind. Her presence changes nothing. Itachi said nothing in reply. His mother said that Uzumaki Kushina was Naruto's mother, and regardless of how strong or weak she was, Itachi felt that an angry mother was a real problem, not an annoyance. If she hadn't been mother's strange but good friend, Itachi would have been very concerned with how to persuade her away from waging a private war against the Uchiha. If there is nothing else, the imprisoned clan head grumbled, inform the clan that I shall be home soon. As you wish, Itachi murmured, bowed, and was escorted away by an umbu. In only a few days, Uchiha Fugaku and Uchiha Tekka would be returned to the Uchiha clan. That would make the rest of the clan happy. At the same time, whatever punishment the Hokage felt was appropriate would be announced and enacted. And that was bound to make the clan very unhappy, whether it was harsh or light. Itachi dreaded all of it. Sasuke found himself at loose ends. It was Sunday and Kakashi insisted that they took some time off training so that there was some rest time in the schedule. So while the Jonin ran errands like visiting the laundromat and the grocery store, Sasuke wandered the village streets aimlessly. Go spend time with your friends, Kakashi-sensei had suggested. What friends? The boy wondered sullenly. My friends were my family, and I have no family now. The only people his age that he'd ever interacted with outside of his clan had been his classmates in school. Sasuke was able to work with them when he had to, but he held his distance from him. They either idolized him as the top student in class, chased after him as a love interest, or were jealous of his talent and Kekai Genkai. He had no real desire to spend time with them when it wasn't necessary. As he passed by Konoha's ninja library, he heard a voice that made him cringe. Sasuke-kun. He kept on walking as if he hadn't heard, but the girl quickly caught up with him. Sasuke-kun, how are you? Sakura asked worriedly, clutching a few books to her chest. Are you all right? I'm fine, he growled, glaring at the sidewalk under his feet. If you want to talk about it. I don't, Sasuke grunted. How could she understand? She was from one of the most minor families. Her relatives strived to be desk ninja in the tower or nurses in the hospital, or trained for civilian jobs. The Harino family was no mighty clan with power, prestige, or pride. How could she understand how he felt to suddenly not be an Uchiha and to be parted from his family? The curse mark pulsed painfully with his rising anger and agitation, and Sasuke grimaced. When it bothers you, it's a warning, Anko had told him. When it warns you, calm the heck down. The more upset you get and the more it hurts, the more you'll want to let it loose and use it. And if you use it, you're screwed. She'd given him all sorts of suggestions for calming down when the mark acted up. Count to 10, count to 100, think happy thoughts, meditate, sing a song, and a dozen other ridiculous things. The crazy special Jonin told him that she liked to practice the traditional tea ceremony to keep herself centered, and Sasuke had a very hard time believing her. Are you sure that you're okay? The pink-haired girl asked, still following him. I'm fine, Sasuke insisted, hoping that she'd get intimidated and slink off like she always eventually did. Have you seen Naruto? She asked after a very uncomfortable pause. I haven't seen him at all since we got back. No, I haven't seen him, he muttered. I don't think anyone will be seeing him for a while. Do you think we should ask Kakashi-sensei about him? The girl wondered anxiously. After what happened to him in the Forest of Death, I'm worried. I don't think he knows anything, Sasuke replied, recalling how Iruka-sensei had visited the Jonin a few times asking about the blonde genin without success. How could he not know anything? Sakura sputtered. Kakashi-sensei should be monitoring his training even if he isn't directly in charge of it. He's our sensei. He's in some kind of protective custody, probably, the ex-Uchiha shrugged. What? The pink-haired girl yelped. What do you mean? Why? My fath Fugaku-sama thought that he was a werewolf and stabbed him, Sasuke blurted out, feeling a bitter taste on his tongue. What? She breathed in shock. The rumors are true. Not all of them, he grunted. Sasuke hadn't paid much mind to the rumors swirling around the village streets lately, but most of what he did hear was total garbage as far as he knew. But Naruto can't be. Sakura sputtered. He's Naruto. I really don't think that Fugaku-sama would have gone and stabbed him without proof, Sasuke mumbled. But Sasuke-kun. The boy cringed again and then was tackled by a blonde girl flying out of a flower shop that he and his teammate had just passed. Get off, he growled, struggling to keep his balance as Yamanaka Ino clung onto his arm. I missed you. The Yamanaka girl squealed. And I was so worried about you with all of the rumors. You can move in with me if you want. I'll make Daddy say yes. Sasuke couldn't help but shudder at the idea. Just how many gods have decided to hate me? Naruto was bored. There was nothing on TV but infomercials, soap operas, and really lame documentaries. And there was nothing else to do in the creepily empty and quiet house. I can't go outside or even look outside, so what am I supposed to do? The boy sighed and turned off the television set in disgust. He shifted around on the couch restlessly, seeking inspiration for something to do. And then his eyes drifted over Mangetsu's collection of boxes. Just what is in all of those? Without the Umbu around to ask, or tell him not to peek, he slipped off the couch and slunk over to the cardboard containers. Naruto hesitated, straining his senses to see if Mangetsu had returned and just not shown himself yet. When he felt sure that he was alone, he went for the first box and opened it. He found basic navy blue ninja uniforms and Jonin/Chunin vests in the first box. The next yielded a bunch of boring books on ninja arts that looked to be really advanced. And another had bunches of kunai and shuriken and spools of wire wrapped in cloth bundles. There were boxes of civilian clothes, extra bits of Umbu armor, more kunai. Huh? Naruto paused and pulled out one of the kunai to study it better. It was the same kind of kunai that his mother had said that his father had owned, with the longer handle and triple blade. The only difference was that these kunai were newer and had weird seal-covered papers wrapped around the handles. Didn't Mom say that only he used this kind? A little bit unnerved, he put the weapon back and went back to pawing through boxes. The very next one, the one that had the checkerboard resting on top, was full of framed photographs. The first one he picked up had a younger-looking Ero Sennin in it, and 3 little genin kids, 2 boys and a girl. The next one had Ero Sennin again, but just with one of the kids, the blonde one. Hey, that kid sorta looks like that old picture Mom had of him. Naruto swallowed and rubbed a sweaty palm on his pant leg. Ero Sennin said that he taught him, so this isn't so weird. But why would Mangetsu have these pictures? He wasn't Ero Sennin, and he wasn't the Kunoichi from Ero Sennin's Genin Kids, or the dark-haired Genin. Mangetsu had blonde hair. No. Werewolves didn't become human again after they turned into wolf monsters. They got stuck forever. Everyone knew that. Naruto escaped that problem because he was a half-kitsune freak. Shaking his head, he grabbed the next framed picture. It looked like his father again. This time he was the sensei with 3 little genin standing in front of him in the traditional first team photo. Naruto quickly set it aside and snatched the next one. The kids in the picture were older and one of them looked a lot like Kakashi-sensei, but without the Sharingan, and, leaning against a tree in the background was his father. Kakashi-sensei mentioned knowing him once, didn't he? Naruto swallowed thickly. But he was Kakashi-sensei's sensei? But, why did Mangetsu have these pictures? His mother hadn't brought them. This box had been here long before she first visited, and with the checkerboard resting on top of the box there was no way the pictures had been planted inside. Confused and trembling for some weird reason, Naruto dug into the box again and pulled out another frame. The image was of his mother and his father with Ero Sennin just behind and between them. All three of them were smiling and his mom looked pregnant. He stared at the picture, at all of the pictures spread over the floor. He stared at the man who was in every single image. He stared at the man's features, the blue eyes, the broad smile, the yellow hair, and grasped for some reason why. What if some werewolves could turn back into humans? Naruto wasn't sure if he threw the frame on the floor or just dropped it, but the picture was suddenly not in his hands but on the floor and the glass was broken. The room was tilting. He couldn't seem to catch his breath. Things were getting blurry. He had to get out of here. He needed to find his mother. She'd be able to explain things. She would make everything better. He had to get out. Mangetsu crouched in a shady spot on a roof and looked across the street. Kushina was there near a mochi stand and eating some of the sweet bean paste. She'd run into the Inoshikacho trio and was chatting animatedly with the three men. Inoichi, Shikaku, and Chaozu looked the same as ever, if perhaps a tiny bit older. Inoichi was more serious than he had been as a teenager, but it was still easy to see the goofy womanizer that he had once been. Shikaku and Chaozu were even more similar to their younger selves, with Shikaku looking like he wanted to take a nap and Chaozu was eating something, as always. Kushina looked wonderful. Her clothes were less colorful than before, but the style was the same. Her vibrant red hair made a nice contrast to her black clothes and he wished that he was closer with a better view so that he could see her deep dark blue eyes. She was beautiful. And looking at her again after so long made him feel like an awkward teenager again. This is stupid, he grumbled to himself. In a few years I'll be 40. When did I get so old? Shaking himself he tightened his focus. As soon as Kushina was alone, he had a note that he'd throw to her. It would give her a meeting place on the fringes of the village where she could freak out without drawing unwanted attention. And then they could talk. No matter how she reacted, they would talk and... A prick cling at the back of his mind made him tense. He had security seals set all around the abandoned property and the outside of the house that would alert him when anyone entered their field. It would give him an idea of their chakra, their identity if he was familiar with them, and their threat potential, so he could decide what to do about any intruder before they could become a problem. If it was something like a squirrel, he'd ignore it, but if he felt some assassin creeping up he could intercept them with his hiration and move them elsewhere so that the neighborhood and Naruto wouldn't be at risk from whatever happened after that. When he focused, he felt that something was going on with one of the windows. It wasn't open, but something had definitely happened to it. However, there was no one outside the house, not even a rabbit or a cat. So with a frown he turned his focus to inside the house. He had a lot less coverage there, just some hiration seals spread throughout the interior that let him know where Naruto was. Daddy! Mangetsu jumped and looked down into the street again to see a young blonde girl dragging a black-haired boy by the arm with a pink-haired girl chasing the both of them towards Kushina, Inoichi, Shikaku, and Chaozu. Daddy! The girl cried, coming to a stop. Can we invite Sasuke-kun over to dinner tonight? The boy didn't look at all happy and said something too quiet for Mangetsu to hear from his location. Inopig. The pink-haired tagalong girl seethed loudly. Let go of his arm. Ino, honey, Inoichi started nervously. That's your daughter. Kushina snorted loudly, echoing Mangetsu's own surprise. When Inoichi said yes, she started to laugh. And it was funny. Inoichi, the man who as a teenager had chased girls almost as much as Jiraiya had, until he'd met his wife, had a daughter. It was ironic. Mangetsu almost laughed, too. Focus now, laugh later. Pushing away the distraction, he reached out to his hiration seals inside of the house. There were some dead spots, like the attic, but his coverage was decent on the ground floor where Naruto should be. With how well secured the outside of the house was, and how obscure the location was, it hadn't been vital to put sensor seals on the interior. He couldn't find Naruto. Abandoning his task of setting up a meeting with Kushina, he hurled himself back into the house. He popped into the kitchen and darted into the living room where the window that was bothering him was located. His boxes had been rummaged through. The framed photographs that the Hokage had given him were scattered on the floor. One of them a picture with Kushina, himself, and his sensei that had been taken mere days before he'd had to leave was broken. Glancing towards the window, he saw that it was shattered from the inside to the outside. The house was empty. He sensed no one else, inside or outside. The sound of a chirping bird drifted in through the broken window. Mangetsu looked down at the pictures on the floor again. Shit. That's it for part 12. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.